Israeli bombing of Gaza's Shajaya neighborhood kills more than 20. Russia warns that bombing Iran won't lead to peace. And China urges the US to focus on mutual benefits. The Israeli occupation forces have targeted a densely populated area in the Shajaya neighborhood, resulting in numerous deaths and injuries. Many injured individuals remain trapped under the rubble of homes destroyed by the Israeli occupation. The number of deaths has surpassed 20, with more casualties expected as rescue teams search for missing persons. Medical sources anticipate the death toll will rise due to critical injuries. The Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has condemned Israel's continued demolition of Palestinian homes and structures under false pretexts, calling it part of a larger pattern of genocide, displacement, annexation and ethnic cleansing. They highlighted the recent demolition of 7 homes and a wedding hall in the West Bank, underscoring Israel's efforts to eradicate Palestinian presence. The ministry reiterated the need for international accountability to halt Israel's illegal actions, which threaten the region's stability. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has exchanged views on the Palestinian cause with UAE Foreign Minister Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The two counterparts discussed Gaza's situation and regional tensions, as well as efforts for early recovery and reconstruction in Gaza. That took place on the sidelines of the Middle East America Dialogue Conference in the UAE. Their discussion focused on strengthening bilateral relations in politics, economics and trade, following directives from the Egyptian and Emirati presidents. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has emphasized the urgent need for humanitarian, medical and sheltering aid to reach Gaza to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinians. That came during a phone call with U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, where they focused on Gaza's situation and ongoing efforts to establish peace. Abdulati also stressed on the importance of a political solution to the Israeli aggression on Gaza, which ensures the establishment of an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Jordan's Prime Minister Jafar Hassan has reaffirmed the nation's unwavering commitment to the Palestinian cause and its firm stance. He emphasized that Jordan's national interests are paramount and no external interference will be tolerated. Hassan warned against internal provocation or attempts to undermine the state, stressing unity, security and economic resilience. He pledged continued reform, investment and protection of Jordan's sovereignty amidst ongoing regional instability. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has rejected a new Israeli proposal to control Gaza's aid deliveries, warning it would limit aid to the last calorie. Guterres emphasized that the UN will not engage in any plan that violates humanitarian principles of neutrality and impartiality. With Gaza's aid blockade since March 2nd, He criticized Israel's refusal to allow supplies at Gaza until Hamas releases detainees, urging full humanitarian access and a permanent ceasefire.
In any arrangement that does not fully respect humanitarian principles.
Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbed to over 50,800 and over 115,700 wounded. Medical sources reported that at least 36 civilians were killed and 41 others injured in Gaza within the last 24 hours as a result of the ongoing Israeli genocide in the region. And for more analysis on this file, we now move to Salma Marwan in our newsroom. Salma.
Thank you, Hani. And for further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by the political analyst, Dr. Meher Sofi. Dr. Meher, thank you so much for joining us on Qnews. And let me first start by asking you, how do you assess the humanitarian impact of the Israeli strike on Shaja'iyya? And what does this indicate about the current phase of the war?
Good afternoon to you and your audiences and kind as to what's happening in the Gaza Strip and specifically in the morning. We've seen a great massacre in a block that led the tens of martyrs and casualties and a complete demolition to the area and a continuation of a genocide. And what's taking place now is an execution of Israeli plans on the Palestinian territories, as well as Netanyahu's endless policy that rely upon the burden land and the destruction of everything, killing the people either by starvation or the bombs and missiles that killing the torn tents and the rifted blocks and through the missiles hit Gaza since October the 7th and the renewable war and the continuing aggression since the 18th of past March. In a continued policy of the occupied entity that does not care of the calls Netanyahu's paying no attention as considered a loose or caring only about his political future and government that sabotages everything, destroying everything in the Gaza Strip as a role model of the torn Rafah, that contain more than 300,000 population that became even to the earth following the demolition of the residential blocks along with everything. Therefore, Israel is to continue to the policy of killing today in Shuja'iyya and before in Qnews and several places, and there is no evidence of the martyrs that most of them from the young people and more than 70% that exceeded since the surge of war on October 7th, more than 60,000 martyrs and more than 20,000 wounded and
yes,
a part of those who are under the rubbles.
Sir, sorry for cutting in, but discussing the human situation. Regarding the UN Secretary General's rejection of Israel's aid control plan, how might this influence international diplomacy and aid flows to Gaza?
Gaza Strip, along of the past 40 days, is locked. Aid never entered the Gaza Strip. The policy of starvation is to continue, alike with the killing policy. The Israeli wanted to the people in the Gaza Strip between the starvation, thirst, and the lack of food and medical supplies. what has been called by the UNRWA officials, that is very clear that there is a clear abandonment of the Palestinian people. For the foreign EU institutions should have played a role and to provide protection and to continue the UNRWA in supporting the Gaza Strip that would help in live safely along with the delivering of their aid. So what Guterres said that is clearly upon the delivery of the aids and should be supported, but the diplomacy and humanity should be manifested throughout the corner of EU, humanity, all the Western countries, and each and every official claiming that he's being democratic, that they should stand before those hunger and all those suffering from the lack of entry in the aid. And even we have seen death cases of infant babies as well as affecting the children due to the lack of vaccination. So hospitals are having a lack of 80% of medical supplies that are required for surgical operations, and due to the process of blocking the way of the humanitarian aid, which is a moral crime committed by Israel currently.
From Cairo, that was the political analyst Dr. Meher Sofi. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And now we go back to Hani in our studio.
Thank you, Salma. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived at the Tel Aviv District Court to testify long-run. The meeting was crucial to the political relations between the two countries, considering Trump's imposed tariffs. Netanyahu expressed Israel's will to reduce U.S. tariffs to zero. Netanyahu is on trial over a separate series of corruption charges, which he denies. He appears weekly in a Tel Aviv court to testify in the 2019 indictment in 3 cases involving gifts from millionaire friends and allegedly seeking regulatory favors for media tycoons in return for favorable news coverage. Moving on to Iran, where the Kremlin has called for a focus on diplomatic contacts instead of actions that may lead to an escalation. Asked about U.S.-Iran tensions over Tehran's nuclear program, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Iranian authorities were taking preventative measures amid harsh rhetoric around the nuclear issue. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has said that bombing Iran would not pave the way to peace. Zakharova said that the world is growing tired of endless threats against Iran and that Russia advocated a reasonable approach to the dispute over Tehran's nuclear program. That comes as Iran and the United States are set to hold talks in Oman this week, with tensions around Tehran's nuclear ambitions high. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he agreed with U.S. President Donald Trump that Iran will not have nuclear weapons as he concluded his Washington, D.C. visit. Netanyahu's statement comes as Iran is approaching weekend talks with the United States over its nuclear program, with little confidence in progress and deep suspicions over U.S. intents. The talks were announced by Trump, who has repeatedly threatened Iran with military action if it does not agree to a deal since he returned to the White House in January. And moving on to the latest developments in the United States.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear I will faithfully take office of President of the United States.
Capitol open, the emergence and reciprocity.
Mexico. Canada.
Greenland.
China has called on the United States to stop its arrogant and bullying behavior after Donald Trump's 104% duties on Chinese imports kicked in. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said the U.S. continues to impose tariffs on China indiscriminately. Lin added if the U.S. really wants to solve the problem through dialogue and negotiation, it should adopt an attitude of equality, respect, and mutual benefits. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said the U.S. President Donald Trump believes that China has to make a deal with the United States concerning additional tariffs. Leavitt said that the Chinese want to make a deal, but don't know how to do it. If China reaches out, she added, Trump would be incredibly gracious, but he would do what's best for the American people. Leavitt confirmed that the U.S. would impose a 104% tariff on China after Beijing did not lift its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods by noon Tuesday deadline set by Trump.
And the president also wanted me. You guys ready?
United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has said exemptions to President Donald Trump's global tariffs are not expected in the near term. Greer said that Swiss cheese in the process would undermine the goal of trade reciprocity. The trade representative, who oversees the implementation of the tariffs, also said there is no particular timeline for trade negotiations. Trump has already implemented a 10% tariff on almost all imports to the world's largest consumer market, which targeted tariffs of up to 50% on many trading partners are due to take effect today.
Closest friends to make sure that we have trading arrangements that work, and if the Chinese are open, we'll see what.
Bank of Japan Governor Kazuo Ueda has said that the central bank must scrutinize without preconception whether the economy is on track to meet its projection, suggesting it's the chance of a pause in interest rate hikes as U.S. tariffs jolt markets. Ueda said while still below the central bank's 2% target, Japan's underlying inflation is gradually accelerating as wage hikes continue. Ueda reiterated that the BOJ will continue to raise interest rates if the economy continues to improve and move in line with its current projections. South Korea has announced emergency support measures for its auto sector, seeking to reduce the blow of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. To help prevent any liquidity issues, the government will raise policy financing support for automakers to 15 trillion won, amounting to $10.18 billion in 2025, from the 13 trillion won, which is $8.8 billion previously planned. The government will lower taxes on automobile purchases to 3.5% from the current 5% until June 2025, and raise electric vehicle subsidies to 30 to 80% of price discounts from the current 20 to 40%, with the period extended by 6 months to the end of this year. Romania's interim president has warned that the country could see a slowdown in foreign investments and possibly recession if the European Union and the US escalated tariffs against each other's exports. Speaking at a press conference, Romania's Lia Bolojan said it was difficult to accurately estimate what the consequences of Trump's tariffs would be, and the responses of other countries and markets will only complicate things even more. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro previously said the EU would need to lower its non-tariff barriers, including those created by value-added taxes, if it wanted to reach a deal to lower U.S. tariffs.
posibil ca în perioada următoare să avem o încetinire a acestor investiții.
The U.S. State Department has said the U.S. and Russian delegations will meet for a second time in Istanbul on Thursday, April 10th. Spokesperson Tammy Bruce said the talks will focus on U.S. embassy operations. Bruce told reporters during a regular news briefing there are no political or security issues on the agenda, and Ukraine is absolutely not on the agenda.
So that is happening in Istanbul. There are no political or security issues.
In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum has said that her nation would categorically reject any unilateral U.S. military in Mexico and that such military action would not resolve anything. Her comments were in response to a question about a report that U.S. President Donald Trump's administration is considering drone strikes on drug cartels in Mexico to combat trafficking across the country's shared border. She added that the U.S. and Mexico had a good ongoing dialogue on security issues and that she did not think the U.S. would pursue such unilateral action. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba have agreed to strengthen ties in a pivotal time for security and stability. Rutte told reporters in a joint press conference, in a more dangerous world, NATO and Japan stand strong to protect values, freedom and peace. Ishiba said that the deepening relationship between Japan and NATO indicates that the security of Europe, the Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific are inseparable. Rutte also welcomed Japan's plan to invest 2% of its GDP in defense by 2027.
Which sets out our vision on how to further strengthen our cooperation.
Polish President Andrzej Duda has said U.S. troops in Poland will be relocated as part of a broader military restructuring. Duda said that U.S. officials, including President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, had assured him there were no plans to reduce the overall American military presence in Poland. The U.S. military said that troops and equipment would be repositioned from Jasionka in the southeast of Poland, which is a hub through which military aid for Ukraine is delivered. The troops will be moved to other parts of Poland. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has said she still intended to stick to her self-imposed fiscal rules until the end of the government's term of office in 2029. Under the rules she set out in October, which aim to balance day-to-day spending with tax revenue by 2029, Reeves has the option to suspend them temporarily in the event of an emergency or a significant economic shock to the UK. Reeves reiterated that Britain would continue to act in its national interest while in ongoing discussions with the US to strike a trade deal.
The stability and security that families and businesses need. We will always act in our country's national.
And South Korea's main opposition party head Lee Jae-myung has said she was stepping down as party leader amid expectations that the current populist front-runner for the presidency in opinion polls would soon declare his run. South Korea will hold a presidential election on June 3rd. After former President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment stemming from a December martial law declaration was upheld on April 4th. Lee, aged 61, lost by the slimmest of margins in the country's history when he ran against Yoon in the 2022 presidential election. Last year, he led his Liberals to a landslide victory in a parliamentary election. These are all the news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's main stories. Israeli bombing of Gaza's Shajai neighborhood kills more than 20. Russia warns that bombing Iran won't lead to peace. And China urges the US to focus on mutual benefits. This concludes our news bulletin for this hour, but please don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at QNewsEGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.